Audiobook Introduction. The Last Drawing of Domenico Trezzini, a listener's guide to Russian folklore. Welcome, listener. You are about to enter a world where the city of St. Petersburg is not merely built on a swamp, it is built on a living mythology. A world where every canal has a voice, every house has a spirit, and every foundation rests on bones both ancient and restless. To understand this novel, you must understand the spirits that inhabit it. They are not decorations. They are not fairy tales. They are forces of nature, as real as the cold, as patient as the stone, as hungry as the water. Before we begin Chapter 1, let me introduce you to the invisible inhabitants of this story. The Rusalki, the voice of the abyss. In Russian folklore, the Rusalki are water spirits, the souls of drowned maidens and unbaptized children. They are beautiful and dangerous. Their song can enchant you, lure you into the depths, and drown you in a moment of perfect peace. In this novel, the Rusalki are something more. They are the voice of the Ancient One, the primordial being that sleeps beneath the Neva river. They are his dreams made flesh. They sing his thoughts. They guard the boundary between the city and the abyss. When Trezzini hears their song, he hears the voice of the deep itself. When he sees their pale hands rising from the water, he sees the price of building a city on forbidden ground. They are beautiful, they are patient, and they are always listening. The domovoi, the house spirit. In every Russian home, according to legend, there lives a domovoi, a small, hairy spirit who dwells behind the stove or under the doorstep. He guards the family and its wealth. He knocks when displeased. He laughs when good fortune is coming. In this novel, the domovoi is not a mere legend. He is a character. He takes up residence in Trezzini's house, scattering his drawings, frightening his son, and whispering secrets in the dark. But this domovoi has a mission. He is the bridge between the human world and the ancient forces beneath the city. He guides Trezzini toward the truth, and toward the terrible choice that will define his life. He is old. He is wise, and he knows what sleeps beneath the stones. The Kikimora, the swamp spirit. The Kikimora is a female spirit, often blamed for nightmares and sleep paralysis. She is the shadow in the corner of your eye, the weight on your chest in the middle of the night. Her name is linked to the word for nightmare. In this novel, the Kikimora appears as Grusha, an ancient witch who lives on the edge of the city, keeper of the old knowledge. She is the first to teach Trezzini that the land has its own geometry, that the spirits hate corners, that the river flows in curves, not in straight lines. She spits on his drawings. She mocks his European confidence, and she forces him to bend his architecture to the will of the earth. She is the voice of the swamp, and she will not be silenced. The Vodyanoi, the water spirit. In Slavic legend, the Vodyanoi is the king of the water, a male spirit who drowns humans, breaks dams, and demands sacrifices. He is the boogeyman of every river, the nightmare of every fisherman. In this novel, the Vodyanoi is something far greater. He is the Ancient One, a creature of cosmic scale, so vast that the entire city of St. Petersburg is built on his body. The marshes are his breath, the quicksand is his mouth, the singing of the rusalki is his voice. Peter the Great built his capital on top of him, but the Vodyanoi was not defeated. He was merely sealed, and every stone laid, every pile driven, every canal dug, it all presses down on him, keeping him in his sleep. He is patient. He has waited 1,000 years. He can wait a little longer. The Leshy, the forest spirit. The Leshy is the guardian of the forest, a spirit who leads travelers astray, who hides in the shadows of the trees, who embodies the wildness that cannot be tamed. In this novel, the Leshy does not appear directly, but his presence is everywhere. He represents the ancient order that Peter the Great tried to replace with straight lines and right angles, the wildness that still lurks at the edges of the city, in the marshes and the forests beyond. He is the spirit of resistance, and he never truly left. The Bannock, the bathhouse spirit. The Bannock is the spirit of the bathhouse, a liminal space where the boundary between worlds is thin. In Russia, bathhouses were places of vulnerability, where the old ones could reach you. In this novel, the Bannock is not a character, but the bathhouse is mentioned as a threshold, a place where Trezzini feels the gaze of the unseen, where the rusalki's song creeps through the steam, where the memory of the drowned presses in from all sides. No space is truly safe. The spirits are everywhere. The Navi, the unquiet dead. The Navi are the souls of those who died an unnatural death, the unbaptized, the drowned, the murdered, the suicides. They are restless. They wander the earth, seeking peace they cannot find. In this novel, the Navi are the thousands of workers who died building St. Petersburg. They are the drowned, the crushed, the frozen, the exhausted. Their souls are trapped in the mud, in the foundations, in the very stones of the city. They sing through the rusalki. They press against the seal. They are the cost of empire, the price of ambition, the memory that the city cannot bury. The city is built on their bones, and they will not be silent. The Old Believer Prophet, the warning voice. The Old Believers were a schismatic Christian sect who rejected the reforms of the Orthodox Church in the 17th century. They preserved older traditions, including many pagan beliefs about spirits, house ghosts, and the power of the earth. In this novel, the Old Believer Prophet appears as a witness, a man who has crossed the boundary between worlds and returned. He warns Trezzini that he is building a prison, that the spirits must be appeased, that the door opens both ways. He speaks the truth, and he pays the price. The rusalki drag him into the Neva, claiming him as their own. His final words are the key to the entire mystery. Build the spire high. Build it sharp. Make the cross a key, not a cross, for the door opens both ways. The Vedma, the witch. The Vedma is a woman with knowledge of herbs, spirits, and the unseen world. She can heal or curse. In pre-Christian times, she was a priestess of the old gods. In Christian times, she became a figure of fear. In this novel, the Vedma is Grusha, the ancient witch who appears at the beginning of the story and returns at the end. She is the keeper of the old knowledge, the geometry of the swamp, the language of the spirits, the rituals that can appease the Ancient One. She teaches Trezzini how to bend his architecture to the will of the land, and in the final act, she performs the rite that seals the prison, giving her life as payment, her soul as the final offering. She is the bridge, she is the sacrifice, she is the memory that endures. The mythological ecosystem. Now you understand. These are not separate creatures. They are one system, a vast, ancient mechanism that holds the city together. The Ancient One sleeps beneath the Neva. The Rusalki sing his thoughts, his dreams, his hunger. The Domovoi bridges the human world and the deep. The Kikimora and the Vedma keep the old knowledge alive. The Navi are the foundation, the cost of building on forbidden ground. The old believer prophet is the warning, the voice that speaks the truth and is silenced. This is the world of the last drawing of Domenico Trezzini, a world where architecture is magic, where water sings, where emperors bargain with the abyss, and where a single drawing hidden for 3 centuries could destroy everything. And so we begin. You are about to enter a city of light built over an abyss of darkness. You will walk beside an architect who must choose between duty and conscience. You will hear the song of the Rusalki, feel the weight of the Ancient One's gaze, and hold the drawing that could break the seal. Now take a breath, listen to the water, and turn the page. St. Petersburg, a city built on bones, a city that rose from the swamps by the will of a single mad genius, Emperor Peter the Great. But what if behind this grand design lay an entirely different purpose? What if Peter was building not merely a capital, but a prison? What if beneath the granite embankments, beneath the palaces and cathedrals, beneath the Neva itself, something ancient sleeps, something hungry, something that has waited for its hour for 1,000 years? And what if the only man who knew this secret was the Italian architect Domenico Trezzini, the very one who drew the city's first plan? Author Anna Gogoleva. Audio rights belong to Anna Gogoleva, 2026. All rights reserved. Any copying, distribution, or public reproduction without the written permission of the copyright holder is prohibited. The last drawing of Domenico Trezzini. Prologue. January 1725. The Winter Palace, St. Petersburg. The Tsar's breath came in shallow gasps, each one a battle against the weight of his own body. Outside, the Neva groaned under a crust of ice thick as a man's arm. But Peter Alexeyevich heard another sound, a low, persistent murmur beneath the floorboards, as if the river had found a way inside the palace walls and was now lapping at the foundations of his bed. No one else heard it. The physicians pressed cool cloths to his forehead. Menshikov paced in the anteroom, whispering about succession. His daughter Elizabeth wept into her handkerchief. But Peter's eyes, still fierce and wet as a winter sea, searched the shadows for one face. When the door opened and Domenico Trezzini stepped in, snow still melting on his Italian coat, the Tsar raised a trembling hand. "Close the door," he rasped, "and lock it." Trezzini obeyed. He was 55 then, his beard threaded with gray, his fingers stained with ink and quicklime. For 13 years he had built this city on the bones of the swamp, the fortress, the cathedral, the 12 colleges, the summer palace. He had drawn more lines than any man in Russia, and every line had been a battle against the mud, the frost, the dead that refused to stay buried. "You hear it?" Peter whispered, his voice a blade scraping stone. "Under us, they are already stirring." Trezzini knelt by the bed. He heard only the crackle of the stove and the distant wail of a night watchman. But he had learned over the years not to trust his ears alone. "Sire," he said carefully, "the cathedral's spire will be raised by spring. I have the timber." "Not the spire, damn you!" Peter gripped his arm with a strength that should have been impossible. "The circle. The circle must be closed before I go. If the spire is not finished before the Annunciation, the seal will break. They will rise through the ice. They will come up through the cellars of every house I have built, and the city will sink back into the bog where it belongs." Trezzini felt his heart contract. He had seen things on these marshes, things he had explained away as fever, as tricks of moonlight, as the superstitious ravings of the Finnish laborers. But the Tsar had never spoken of them openly, not like this. "Show me the first stone," Trezzini said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "The one you laid yourself. If I am to seal it, I must know where it lies." Peter's eyes flickered with something between fear and triumph. He fumbled under his pillow and produced a small iron key, black with age, its teeth shaped like a curling fern. "In the cellar of the summer palace," he said, "behind the plaster of the eastern wall, you will find a niche. Inside, the stone. It has runes older than the Varangians. I built the cathedral over it to keep it pinned, but the stone is not enough. You must add your own mark, Trezzini, your architect's seal. And you must write the name of the city on it, but backward, so the dead cannot read it." Trezzini took the key. It was cold as river water. "Promise me," Peter insisted, his voice rising into a rasp. "Promise me you will finish the cathedral, not for my glory, for the living, for the children who will walk these streets without knowing what sleeps beneath them." "I promise," Trezzini said, and he meant it. But as he spoke, the murmur under the floor swelled into a distinct rhythm, a pulse like a heartbeat, slow and ancient, coming from the deep stone foundations of the city. Peter closed his eyes, and his face, for a moment, looked almost peaceful. "They think I built this place to spite the Swedes," he whispered. "They think I wanted a window to Europe. But a window is also a door, Domenico. And doors open both ways." Part 1. The Italian Fool. Chapter 1. The Invitation, 1712. Copenhagen, March. Domenico Trezzini sat in his rented room on the Köbmagergata, staring at the ceiling where the damp had bloomed into a map of strange islands. His wife, Anna, lay in the bed behind him, her cough muffled by a pillow she had pressed to her mouth so as not to disturb the neighbors. The last of his savings had gone to the apothecary, powders that did nothing, leeches that grew fat and lethargic. His architectural practice had dried up. The Danish court preferred Frenchmen, and the Swedes were enemies of all things Italian. At 42, Domenico had become a ghost in a foreign city, sketching villas that would never be built, dreaming of loggias and porticos that existed only in the margins of his notebooks. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, carried by a courier in a sheepskin coat who smelled of tar and frozen fish. The seal was wax, but not the usual red. It was a deep, oily green, and it bore the double-headed eagle of the Russian Tsar. Trezzini broke the seal with a carpenter's knife. The letter was in French, written in a sprawling, hurried hand that suggested either a scribe in haste or a monarch who disdained formality. To the esteemed Signor Domenico Trezzini, architect of Lugano, now residing in Copenhagen. His Imperial Majesty Peter Alexievich, Tsar and autocrat of all Russia, extends his greetings and his commission. We have seen your designs for the fortress of Narva, which came to our attention through the offices of our ambassador in Stockholm. We are informed that you understand not only the geometry of stone, but also the geometry of water, a rare gift, and one we require for our new city on the Neva River. We invite you, therefore, to enter our service as chief architect of the fortress of St. Petersburg, of the Admiralty, and of the Cathedral of the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul. Your salary shall be fixed at 1,000 rubles per. That night, as Anna slept fitfully, he sat by the window and wrote a reply. He wrote in Italian because he wanted the Tsar to know he was not a servant, but a master of his craft. To His Imperial Majesty, I accept your invitation not as a subject, but as a fellow seeker after the true proportions. I bring you not only my hands, but my eyes, and I will show you that a city is more than a collection of walls. It is a body, and a body has its humors, its spirits, its secret correspondences. I will build your fortress, your admiralty, your cathedral. But I warn you, I will also build what I see, and if what I see disturbs you, do not blame the architect, blame the ground on which you choose to stand. Your servant, Domenico Trezzini. He sealed the letter with his own ring, a plain signet of brass, engraved with a compass and a square, the old emblems of his guild. And as he pressed the wax, he felt a curious sensation, as if the floor beneath him had shifted by the breadth of a hair. He looked down. The floor was still. The room was still. But the ink in his inkwell had begun to ripple, though no wind touched it. Chapter 2. The Road to the Bogs. Pskov, August 1712. The journey from Reval to St. Petersburg took 3 weeks, through forests that seemed to... Trezzini wrote in his diary. An old fool, no doubt, but his words have lodged in my mind like a splinter. I must remember that I am an architect, not a priest. My duty is to stone and mortar, not to the phantoms of the ignorant. But he could not shake the image of the shadowless monk, and when he looked at the bells, those great clanging monuments to faith, he wondered if they were meant to call the living to prayer or to drive something else away. Chapter 3. Hare Island. Petrograd side, October 17, 12. The island was not an island in any proper sense. It was a patch of firmer mud surrounded by channels of black water that stank of rotten vegetation and dead fish. The Finnish called it Anisari, the Hare Island, because the hares that lived there were said to be as big as dogs and fearless of men. But the hares were gone now, driven out by the first wave of soldiers and laborers who had come to build the fortress. Trezzini arrived on a gray morning, the sky low and heavy as a wet blanket. He stepped from the boat onto a plank that wobbled over the ooze. He ordered the piles to be re-driven, this time with bread and salt. He wrote in his diary, "I have seen nothing that cannot be explained by current, tide, and the poor quality of the timber. And yet, I cannot explain why the logs broke in the middle as if snapped by a hand, nor why the watchmen swear they heard singing from the water, a singing that sounded like the voices of drowned children." He did not sleep that night. He stayed by the fire, his copy of Vitruvius open on his lap, and he read the passage on the founding of cities. "The founder must first consult the auguries, for the earth itself is alive, and the gods dwell in the springs and the groves." He had always read that as metaphor. Now, for the first time, he wondered if it was literal. In the morning, he walked to the eastern edge of the island, where the future cathedral would stand. The ground was firmer here, almost dry, and in the center of the clearing stood a single birch tree, not planted, but ancient, its roots twisted into the shape of a spiral. Beneath it, half buried in moss, he saw a flat stone. He scraped away the moss with his boot, revealing lines carved into the rock, a spiral, and a pattern of dots that might have been a star map. He knelt and traced the lines with his finger. They were old, older than the log foundations of the Swedes, older perhaps than the menhirs the old man had spoken of. And as he touched the stone, he felt a vibration, not from the ground, but from the air around him, as if the island itself had hummed a single note. He looked up. The birch tree swayed, though there was no wind, and from the water, faintly, he heard the singing again, the voices of children, laughing. Trezzini stood, brushed the moss from his hands, and walked back to his tent. He took out his inkwell and his finest parchment, and he began to draw the cathedral, not as a church, but as a monument to something he did not yet understand. He drew it with high walls and a needle spire, and at its base he drew a chamber, dark and windowless, with a stone at its heart. He did not know why he drew that chamber, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that one day he would have to enter it. And he knew, too, that when he did, he would not be alone. Chapter 4. The Carpenters' Guild. November 17, 12. The Petrograd side, near the future summer garden. The frost came early that year, creeping across the Neva like a white serpent, turning the mud to iron and the reeds to glass. Trezzini had been on Hare Island for 6 weeks, and in that time he had learned that building a city on a swamp was not a matter of engineering. It was a matter of negotiation. With the weather, with the soil, with the men, and with whatever lurked beneath the black water. His greatest challenge, however, was not the mud. It was the carpenters. The Tsar had sent him a crew of 30 Russian woodworkers, men from the northern forests of Olonets and Karelia, who had built churches without a single nail and could shape a log into a curve that would make a French mathematician weep with envy. But they could not read his drawings. Trezzini stood at his drafting table, the cold seeping through the soles of his boots, and watched as the foreman, a barrel-chested giant named Yefim, squinted at the plan for the summer palace's main staircase. Yefim turned the parchment upside down, then sideways, then held it up to the light. "What is this?" Yefim asked, tapping the paper with a calloused finger. "These lines, they are not straight. They go back, they go forward, they go into the page." "That is perspective," Trezzini said, his patience fraying. "It shows how the staircase will look when you stand at the bottom and look up. The depth is implied by the converging lines." "Implied," Yefim grunted. "In my village, we cut the wood and we fit it. We do not imply the joint. We make the joint. This paper tells me nothing about the angle of the tenon or the depth of the mortise. It tells me only what you see. But I do not build with my eyes. I build with my hands." Trezzini snatched the drawing from him. "You will learn to read it, or you will find other work. The Tsar himself approved of these plans. Are you saying the Tsar is wrong?" Yefim's face did not change. He had been a soldier before he was a carpenter. He had faced Swedes and Turks and the knout of his own officers. An Italian with a quill was not going to intimidate him. "I am saying," Yefim replied slowly, "that the Tsar may see things differently when he is standing on the staircase. But I will not build a staircase that breaks a man's neck because the angle of the riser was implied on paper. Show me a model. Show me a full-scale mock-up. Then I will build." Trezzini opened his mouth to argue, but a voice from the doorway cut him off. "He is right, you know." Trezzini turned. An old woman stood in the entrance of the workshed, wrapped in a shawl of coarse wool, her face a web of wrinkles that seemed to hold the memory of every winter ever known. She leaned on a birch staff, and her eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, fixed on the drawing in his hand. "Who are you?" Trezzini demanded. "This is a work site. Women are not permitted." "I am permitted where the spirits permit," the old woman said. She shuffled forward, her feet bare despite the cold, and she reached out a gnarled hand. "Give me the paper." Trezzini hesitated, but something in her voice compelled obedience. He handed her the plan. She studied it for a long moment, then spat on it. A globule of gray spittle landed square in the center of the staircase. "Foolishness," she said. "You draw angles that do not exist. You draw lines that the river will erase. The Neva flows in curves, curves that are older than your saints, older than your Tsar. You build a straight wall, and the water will find its way around it. You build a corner, and the ground will crack. I have seen it in the stone circles that stood here before the Swedes came. The spirits do not like corners." Trezzini felt a flush of anger. "Madam, I have studied architecture in Rome and in Paris. I have built fortifications that have withstood siege. I do not need a peasant woman to tell me about geometry." The old woman laughed, a dry, rattling sound like stones in a bucket. "Geometry? You think that is geometry?" She tapped the staircase on the plan. "This is the geometry of the dead. Straight, rigid, cold. But the living earth moves. It breathes. It has its own angles, its own curves. And if you do not learn to draw those, your palace will sink into the bog before the roof is on." She turned to Yefim and spoke in rapid. The next morning he walked to the site of the summer palace, a low, sandy bank on the opposite shore of the Neva, where the river widened and slowed. The ground here was firmer, but as he paced the outline of the planned foundations, he noticed something odd. The soil was not uniform. Where the plan demanded a straight line, the earth sloped gently. Where the plan demanded a corner, the earth dipped into a hollow. The river had carved this bank into a series of subtle terraces, each one following the curve of the current. He knelt and pressed his palm to the frozen ground. It was cold, but not dead. He felt a vibration, a faint thrum, like the string of a bass viol. He had felt the same vibration at Hare Island beneath the birch tree. It was the pulse of the river, the deep, slow breath of the marsh. He returned to his tent and with a trembling hand redrew the plan of the summer palace. He gave the facade a gentle curve, so slight that it would be invisible to the naked eye, but enough to follow the contour of the bank. He adjusted the windows, the doors, the roofline, all to accommodate the bend. When he finished, he looked at the new drawing. It was no longer a European palace. It was something else, something that seemed to grow from the ground rather than stand upon it. It was strange and beautiful and deeply unsettling. He took it to Yefim that afternoon. The carpenter studied it in silence, then nodded once. "This," Yefim said, "this I can build. It speaks the same language as the soil. Good." "Then we begin tomorrow," Trezzini said, relieved. Yefim hesitated. "There is one thing. Grusha says you must make an offering before the first pile is driven. Not bread and salt, something for the old ones, the ones who sleep beneath the river. A coin, but not copper, silver, and a lock of your hair." Trezzini laughed. "A lock of my hair? Why?" "Because she says the spirits want a piece of the builder. Without it, they will not trust you. They will see you as a stranger, and they will fight you." Trezzini looked at Yefim, then at the river, then back at the plan in his hands. He thought of the old believer in the forest, the dream of the shadowless monk, the singing of the drowned children. He thought of Anna dying in Copenhagen, and of the Tsar's strange letter, and of the hermetical books he had brought with him. "Tell Grusha," he said slowly, "that I will give her a silver coin. But my hair, I keep my hair. If the spirits cannot trust a man with his own hair, then they are not spirits worth building for." Yefim shrugged. "I will tell her, but I warn you, she will be angry." "She is already angry," Trezzini said. "What is one more anger?" That evening, as he sat by his stove, he took out his father's book, De Magia Sympathica, and opened it to a marked page. The passage read, "The foundation of any permanent structure requires not only the alignment of the walls with the cardinal directions, but also the alignment of the builder's soul with the spirit of the place. For the earth has memory, and the memory of the earth is long. To build upon a site without acknowledging its memory is to build upon a wound that will fester. The festering will manifest as cracks, as damp, as the slow sinking of the stone, and ultimately as the return of the spirit to reclaim its territory." Trezzini closed the book and stared at the flame. He had come to Russia to build a city of reason, a city of straight lines and clear perspectives. But the city itself was resisting him, not with armies, not with weather, but with something older and more patient. It was resisting him because he did not belong. He wrote a letter to Anna. "My dearest, I have been here 2 months now, and I have not yet laid a single stone in the place where the Tsar intends his palace. The carpenters are a mystery to me. They work without plans, guided by a tradition that seems to come from the very mud beneath our feet. And there is an old woman, a witch they call Grusha, who speaks to the spirits of the river and tells me to bend my walls. I have bent them. I do not know why. I feel I am losing myself, Anna. Losing the part of me that believed in geometry and reason. These people, these Russians, they live in a world of signs and portents, where every stone has a voice and every tree has a soul. I am beginning to hear those voices too. I am beginning to think I am going mad. But the Tsar is delighted. He came to the site yesterday, disguised as a common laborer, and he praised my revised plans. He said, 'You are learning Italian. You are learning to listen.' I do not know what he meant. I fear I do. I miss you. The winter is coming, and I am cold in a way that has nothing to do with the temperature. Your Domenico." He sealed the letter and gave it to the courier. Then he sat by the fire, watching the shadows dance on the walls of his tent, and he wondered if the spirits were watching too. Chapter 5. The First Meeting with Peter. December 17, 12. The Summer Palace Site, frozen bank of the Neva. The Tsar came without warning, a thunder of hooves at dawn, a voice that cut through the fog like a blade. Trezzini was in his tent, shaving with cold water, when the canvas was thrown back and a giant of a man stepped inside. He was not dressed like a Tsar. He wore a coarse linen shirt, worn leather breeches, and boots caked with mud. His hands were calloused, his face sunburned, his hair tied back with a thong. He looked like a master carpenter, which, in a sense, he was. "So, you are the Italian," the man said, his accent thick, but his French fluent. I have heard you have been altering my plans. Trezzini froze, the razor in his hand. Your Majesty. Sit. The Tsar waved a hand. I am not here for ceremony. I am here to see the summer palace, and to meet the man who dared to put a curve on my straight facade. Trezzini set down the razor and bowed. I did not mean to presume, Your Majesty, but the ground is not what the maps showed, Peter finished. I know. I have walked this marsh 100 times. I have felt it shift under my feet. That is why I sent for you, not for your straight lines. Any German can draw straight lines. I sent for you because I heard you were willing to bend. Trezzini blinked. I do not understand, sire. Peter laughed, a great booming laugh that seemed to shake the tent. Come, walk with me. They walked along the riverbank, the frost crunching under their boots. The Tsar walked with a rolling gait, like a sailor on a ship, and he kept his eyes on the ground as if reading a text written in the ice. You have read Vitruvius? Peter asked. Yes, sire. I have read him, and Alberti, and Palladio. Good. Then you know that the ancient Romans believed that cities should be founded according to the will of the gods. They consulted the augurs. They surveyed the entrails. They marked the boundaries with blood. You think that is superstition? Trezzini hesitated. I think it is tradition, sire, a way of bringing the people together. Peter stopped and turned to face him. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they seemed to pierce through Trezzini's skin to the bones beneath. I have seen things in this marsh, Italian, Peter said quietly. Things that no book of architecture can explain. I have seen lights dancing on the water at midnight, lights that move against the wind. I have heard voices coming from the earth, voices that speak in a language I cannot understand. I have seen stones that move on their own, turning to face the sunrise. Do you know what those things are? Trezzini shook his head. Neither do I, Peter said, but I know they are here. They have always been here. The Finns, the Karelians, the old ones who lived on this land before the Slavs. They knew how to live with these things. They built their shrines on the spots where the earth was thin, where the spirits could be heard. They left offerings, they sang songs, and the spirits did not harm them. He began walking again, and Trezzini followed. Now I come here, Peter continued, and I want to build a city, a great city, a European city. But I am building on land that has its own memory. I cannot simply erase that memory with walls and cannons. I must negotiate with it. I must make it my ally. And that is why I need you. Sire, I am an architect, not a priest. An architect is a priest, Peter said, turning back with a fierce smile. A priest of stone and mortar. You build temples to the gods of reason and order, but here the gods are older than reason. They are the gods of mud and water, of frost and fire. You must learn to honor them, even as you build over them. That is what I have been doing, secretly, quietly, and I have succeeded. The city rises, and the spirits have not destroyed it. But the work is not finished. They reached the site of the summer palace, a low hillock of frozen earth surrounded by the stumps of felled birches. Peter led Trezzini down a narrow stairway into a cellar half excavated, its walls lined with rough-hewn timber. At the far end, a lantern hung from a beam, casting a pool of yellow light on a stone slab set into the floor. Peter knelt and brushed away the frost. Trezzini knelt beside him. The stone was dark, almost black, and on its surface was carved a pattern, a labyrinth like the ones in Roman mosaics, but different. The paths of this labyrinth did not lead to a center. They spiraled outward, branching and rejoining, forming a shape that reminded Trezzini of the branches of the birch tree. "What is this?" Trezzini whispered. "This is the plan," Peter said. "The true plan. The one that was here before I came. I found it under the roots of an old birch, the same tree you saw on Hare Island, beneath which the stone lies. I had the tree cut down, but I kept its roots. They are woven into this pattern." Trezzini traced the lines with his finger. They felt warm, as if heated from below. "There is a layer beneath this layer," Peter said. "A city older than any city. A network of tunnels, of channels, of chambers where things sleep. The Swedes knew about it. They built their fortress on the island, but they never dug deep. They were afraid. I am not afraid. I want to build on top of that city, not to destroy it, but to seal it, to turn it into a foundation. And you, Trezzini, are going to help me." "Sire," Trezzini said, his voice trembling, "I do not understand. What is below us?" Peter's face grew serious. "I do not know its name. The Finns called it Velamo's Hall after their sea goddess. The old believers call it the Abyss of the Serpent. I have seen its entrance, in a cave on the shore of the Gulf, where the water boils even in winter. I have sent divers down. Some returned, some did not. The ones who returned spoke of great pillars, of carved stones, of a silence that was not empty, but listening." Peter stood and looked down at the labyrinth. "I have read your books, Trezzini, the ones on hermetic geometry. I know you understand the principle, that form can contain, that lines can bind, that angles can trap. That is what I am asking you to do. Build the city as a prison for whatever sleeps below. Build the cathedral as the key to that prison. And when you have finished, I will have peace." Trezzini stared at the labyrinth. His mind was racing. He thought of Grusha, of the old man in the forest, of the singing voices, of the piles that had snapped in the night. It was all true, all of it. "You are asking me to build a cage," he said finally. "I am asking you to build a seal," Peter corrected. "A seal that will hold for 1,000 years, or until the end of the world." Trezzini looked up at the Tsar. The lantern light flickered across Peter's face, and for a moment he saw not a monarch, but a man haunted by something he could not name, driven by a vision that would not let him rest. "If I do this," Trezzini said slowly, "if I build this seal, what becomes of the spirits, the ones that live in the stones, in the water?" Peter's gaze was unreadable. "They will sleep," he said. "They will sleep, and the city will live. And perhaps, in time, the city will forget what lies beneath. That is my hope. That is my prayer." He reached out and gripped Trezzini's shoulder. "You came to Russia to build. I give you the greatest building in the world, a city over an abyss. What more could any architect desire?" Trezzini had no answer. He only looked at the labyrinth, at the warm stone, at the shadows that danced on the cellar walls. And he knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that he would never leave this place. He would build the seal, and he would be part of it, and his name would be carved into the stone alongside the old ones, for better or worse. That night he wrote in his diary, "The Tsar has spoken. He has shown me the labyrinth. He has revealed his true purpose, to use the city as a prison for the ancient forces that dwell beneath the marsh. I am no longer building a capital. I am building a tomb. But the tomb must be livable, beautiful, and strong enough to last a millennium. This is my task. This is my curse. I have decided to accept it, not because I believe, but because I must. If I leave now, the city will sink. If I stay, I may become something other than an architect, a guardian, a jailer, a keeper of the seal. I do not know if that is a higher calling or a damnation. Tomorrow I will begin the first drafts of the cathedral. I will make the spire a needle sharp enough to pierce the heart of the earth. I will make the walls thick enough to hold a god, and I will make the foundation deep enough to reach the place where the old ones wait. God help me." He closed the diary and looked out the window of his tent. The Neva had frozen solid, and across its white expanse he saw the outline of the future city, the bastions, the palaces, the spires, rising like a dream from the ice. But beneath the ice, he knew, there was another city, a city of shadows and sleepers, waiting for the day when the seal would break. He shivered, though the stove was hot, and in the distance he heard it again, the singing of the children rising from the river, calling him deeper into the dark. Part 2. The City on Bones. Chapter 6. The Price. 1717. Petrograd side, March, 5 years after the first pile. The city had grown like a fever, rapid, consuming, leaving no one untouched. Where reeds had whispered, now cannon blasts echoed from the fortress walls. Where wolves had hunted, now merchants hawked herring and tallow in makeshift stalls. The summer palace stood finished, its curved facade gleaming with pale yellow plaster, a monument to Trezzini's first compromise with the spirits. But the compromise had come at a cost. Trezzini walked through the streets that morning, his boots splashing through the slush that was already turning to mud. Spring had arrived early, and the Neva was cracking its icy chains with groans that sounded almost human. Along the embankment, gangs of laborers were digging a canal, the first of many, their bodies steaming in the cold air. They worked in shifts of 12 hours, fed on black bread and cabbage soup, and when they collapsed, they were buried where they fell, their bones becoming part of the foundation. Trezzini had calculated the loss. For every meter of stone laid, 3 men died. For every bastion raised, 100. The city was built on a carpet of corpses, and the Tsar knew it. But Peter did not stop the work. He only ordered more workers, more prisoners, more pressed peasants from the distant provinces. "Signor Trezzini!" He turned. A young man was running toward him, his face flushed with urgency. It was Pietro, his son, 17 now, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's long, thin fingers. He had come to Russia 2 years after Trezzini, when Anna's health had improved enough for the journey. She had improved enough to die here, slowly, in the damp. "Papa, you must come home," Pietro said, gasping. "The drawings, they have fallen again, all of them, and the stove is making sounds." Trezzini felt a familiar chill. This was not the first time. "Show me," he said, and they hurried through the muddy lanes to the house on the Petrograd side, a modest 2-story wooden structure, painted green, with a Dutch tile stove that had cost Trezzini a month's salary. Inside, the chaos was as Pietro had described. The plans for the 12 colleges lay scattered across the floor, some torn, some crumpled. The inkwell had been overturned, spilling black ink in a pattern that looked, Trezzini thought with a lurch, like the labyrinth Peter had shown him. And from the stove, a low, rhythmic rumble emanated. Not the crackle of burning wood, but something deeper, like a snore. Pietro's hands shook as he pointed. "It came just before dawn. I was working on my Latin lessons, and I heard a scratching in the wall. I thought it was a rat, but then the drawings flew off the table. Flew, Papa, as if thrown by a hand. And then the stove." The stove rumbled again, and a puff of soot billowed from its mouth, settling on the floor in a shape that was almost a face. Trezzini walked to the stove and opened the iron door. Inside, the fire was low, but there was no wood burning. The coals glowed with an eerie greenish light, and in the ash he saw the imprint of a foot, not a human foot, but something broader, with toes that seemed to curl like claws. He closed the door slowly and turned to his son. "Pietro," he said, his voice calm despite the pounding in his chest. "When did you first see whoever it was?" Pietro swallowed. "3 nights ago. I woke to drink water, and I saw him in the corner. An old man, hairy, with a beard that reached his knees. He was sitting on the floor, looking at your drawings, and he was laughing. Not loudly, a quiet laugh, like a stone rolling in a river. When I blinked, he was gone." Trezzini sat down heavily on a stool. He had heard the stories of the domovoi, the house spirit that lived in every Russian home. Some said he was the soul of the first man who had died on that land. Others said he was a child of the ancient earth, bound to the hearth by a pact older than memory. Trezzini had dismissed these as peasant tales, like the ones about the Vedma Grusha. But now the evidence was on his floor, in his stove, in the trembling of his son's voice. "Did he speak?" Trezzini asked. "A little," Pietro said. "I think. He said that the house belongs to him, that we are guests, and that if you do not stop drawing the hard lines," he called them hard lines, "he will make the walls weep." Trezzini stood and began to pace. The irony was bitter. He had spent 5 years bending his architecture to appease the spirits of the earth, curving his walls, deepening his piles, placing offerings of bread and salt in every foundation. And now the spirits had followed him home. "Pietro," he said, "tell me exactly what he looked like. Was he old? Tall? Did he have a face that could be recognized?" Pietro thought. "He was not like a man," he said slowly. "He was like a tree that had taken a man's shape. His skin was bark, his hair was moss, and his eyes were like the coals in the stove, green and glowing. When he laughed, he showed no teeth, just a dark hole like a well." Trezzini grabbed his son by the shoulders. "Listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "If you see him again, you do not look at him. You do not speak to him. You leave the room quietly and come to find me. Do you understand?" Pietro nodded, frightened. "Now go to your mother," Trezzini said. "Tell her I will be late for supper. I have work to do." But he did not work. He sat at his table, staring at the scattered drawings, and he thought of the labyrinth beneath the cellar of the summer palace. He thought of the carved stone with its runes and its spirals, and of the Tsar's strange words, "A window is also a door." The old woman Grusha had warned him. The old believer on the road had warned him. Even the Karelian foreman had told him, in his halting Russian, that the spirits do not accept borders. They flow like water. They seep through cracks. They find their way into every house, every heart. That evening he sat by the stove and read his father's book again, De Magia Sympathica. He found a passage he had previously overlooked. "The spirit of a place does not leave when the place is built upon. It merely withdraws into the walls, into the hearth, into the foundations. It bides its time, and when it chooses to return, it returns not as a force of nature, but as a guest in the house. It makes its presence known through small signs, a falling book, a cold draught, a voice in the chimney. These are not attacks, they are negotiations. The spirit asks, 'Will you live with me in peace, or must I drive you out?'" Trezzini closed the book and looked at the stove. The green glow had faded, but the air in the room felt heavy, as if something was listening. He spoke aloud, his voice low and steady. "I am an architect. I build walls to keep out the cold, not to keep in the spirits. If you wish to live in this house, you are welcome, provided you do not harm my family, and provided you do not touch my drawings. Those are sacred to me. They are the work of my hands, the thought of my mind. Touch them, and I will find a way to drive you out." The stove rumbled softly, as if in reply, and then the room was silent. Trezzini went to bed, but did not sleep. He lay awake, watching the shadows, and in the corner of the room, just visible in the faint light of the dying fire, he saw a shape, a heavy, squat shape, like a pile of sacks, that had not been there before. He did not look at it. He closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. In the morning, the shape was gone, but on the floor beside his bed, in the ashes that had been swept from the stove, was a single word, written in Finnish, the old language of the land. Trezzini did not speak Finnish, but he recognized the word from Grusha's chants. It was the name of the river god, the one who lived beneath the Neva. Vellamo. Chapter 7. The Prophet's Warning. Summer. The western bastion of the Peter and Paul fortress. The construction of the fortress had entered its 5th phase, and Trezzini had grown accustomed to the smell of wet lime, the clang of hammers, the constant murmur of the river. But he had never grown accustomed to the deaths. That July, a section of the wall collapsed during a storm, burying 40 workers in a slurry of mud and broken stone. They had been digging a trench for the foundation of the Kunstkamera, the Tsar's cabinet of curiosities, when the ground gave way. Trezzini rushed to the site and found a scene from a nightmare. Hands protruding from the wet earth, faces pressed against the mud, eyes still open and staring. He ordered the men dug out, but he knew it was hopeless. The mud had swallowed them, and the mud would not give them back. That night he walked along the riverbank, trying to clear his mind. The moon was full, casting a silver path across the Neva, and the air was warm with the rot of the marsh. He sat on a fallen log and watched the water lap at the shore, and for a moment he let himself think of Anna, of her cough, her pallor, her unshakable faith that he would build something beautiful. He was so lost in thought that he did not hear the footsteps. Trezzini. The voice was old, dry, familiar. He turned and saw the old believer from the road, the bent man with the staff, the one who had disappeared into the forest 5 years ago. But he was not the same. His skin had turned gray, his eyes had sunk deep into their sockets, and his hands trembled as if he were holding the weight of centuries. "You are dead," Trezzini said, his voice catching. "They told me you walked into the forest and never came back." "I walked into the forest," the old man said, "but I did not die. I went to the place where the earth is thin, where the old ones speak. I have been there ever since, and I have come to warn you." Trezzini stood, his heart hammering. "Warn me of what?" The old man pointed to the cathedral rising in the distance, its spire still a skeleton of timber. "You are building the seal," he said. "You are building it well, but the Tsar is dying." "The Tsar is healthy," Trezzini said. "I saw him last week. He was fighting with a hammer." "The Tsar is dying," the old man repeated, his voice like sandpaper. "I have seen it in the water. His body is strong, but his soul is worn thin by the weight of what he has done. He has torn the veil between worlds, and the veil is fraying. When he dies, the seal will weaken, and if you have not finished the cathedral, if the spire does not reach the height he demands, the old ones will rise." Trezzini felt the cold creep into his bones. "I have been given until the Annunciation, 1725. That is 8 years. It is enough." "The Annunciation," the old man said, and a terrible smile spread across his face. "You have been given until the Annunciation. But what if the Annunciation comes early? What if the Tsar dies in January, before the snow melts? What if the spire is still a skeleton of timber when the ice breaks?" Trezzini had no answer. The old man stepped closer, his eyes boring into Trezzini's. "I have seen the thing that sleeps beneath the city," he whispered. "It is not a demon, not a god, not a man. It is older than all of these. It was here before the land rose from the sea. It will be here after the city crumbles to dust. And it is hungry, Trezzini. It has been hungry for 1,000 years. The Tsar has built a prison for it, but a prison is not a grave. And the prisoner has learned to speak to the guards." Trezzini stepped back, his boot slipping on the wet grass. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" "I am a voice," the old man said. "A voice from the deep, speaking through this cracked vessel. I have come to tell you that the seal is not enough. You must make the cathedral a key as well as a lock. You must give the people a way to speak to the prisoner, to placate it, to feed it something other than flesh. If you do not, the city will be a tomb, not a prison, but a digested prison." He raised his staff and pointed to the water, where the moon had painted a shimmering path. "Look," he said. Trezzini looked. In the silver light, the surface of the Neva began to stir, not with waves, but with a slow, circular movement, as if something vast was turning beneath the current. And then he saw them, pale forms rising from the depths, long and slender, with hair that floated like seaweed. They were women, or the shapes of women, and they sang in a language that was not human. The old man stepped back, his face drained of blood. "They come for me," he said. "I have spoken too much. I have broken the pact." "Come where?" Trezzini cried. "Wait!" But the old man was already walking into the water, his staff still in his hand. The pale forms swirled around him, their arms reaching, their mouths opening in songs that were more sorrow than sound. Trezzini tried to run, to pull him back, but his feet were rooted to the bank. The old man turned and looked at him one last time. His eyes were no longer gray, they were black, like the water of the deep. And his voice, when it came, was not old, but young, a voice that seemed to come from a distant age. "Build the spire, build it high, build it sharp. And when you place the cross on top, make sure the cross is not a cross. Make it a key. For the door opens both ways, and the key that locks also unlocks." The water closed over him. The pale forms sank with him, their song fading to a whisper, then to silence. Trezzini stood on the bank, shivering, his clothes soaked with spray. He waited for the old man to resurface. He did not. He walked back to his house in a daze, his mind churning. When he entered, the stove rumbled again, and the shadow in the corner shifted, but he paid it no mind. He took out his father's book and opened it to the chapter on the architecture of temples. He read the passage on the axis mundi, the world axis, the central point around which all order revolves. And he understood, for the first time, what the Tsar had meant by the seal. The cathedral was not just a church. It was the needle that pinned the sleeping giant to the earth. And if the needle was not sharp enough, not long enough, the giant would wake. He began to sketch, feverishly, a new design for the spire, a design that would make it taller, thinner, more precise. He drew it with the obsession of a man who has seen the face of what he fears, and who knows that only his hands can hold it back. The shadow in the corner leaned closer, watching, and in the distance the Neva sang its ancient song. Chapter 8. The Tsar's Coffer, 1722. The Winter Palace, St. Petersburg, November. 5 years had passed since the prophet's death, and much had changed. Anna had faded like a winter light, her cough deepening into a wasting illness that no doctor could cure. She died in 1720 in the green house on the Petrograd side, with Pietro holding her hand and Trezzini standing at the window, watching the Neva freeze. He had not wept. He had not had time. The construction of the 12 colleges demanded his attention, and the cathedral spire was still unfinished, a skeleton of scaffolding that rose against the sky like the rib cage of a leviathan. Every day the Tsar sent messengers to ask for the spire's progress. Every day Trezzini replied, in spring it will be complete." But spring had come and gone, and the spire still lacked its final section. The lumber was rotten, the carpenters were exhausted, and the funds had been diverted to the new naval base at Kronstadt. Trezzini wrote letters, begged for money, and was ignored. Now, in the gray November light, he sat in the Tsar's study, a cavernous room lined with maps and ship models, lit by a dozen candles that flickered in a draught from the window. Peter sat across from him, his face gaunt, his eyes ringed with the shadows of a man who had not slept in weeks. "The spire, Trezzini," Peter said. "I must know. Will it be finished by the Annunciation?" Trezzini hesitated. He had seen the prophet's face beneath the water. He had heard the prophet's words. But the Tsar was not a man to be lied to, even for his own good. "Sire," Trezzini said carefully, "the timber is weak. The architects in Moscow have refused to send the oak I requested, and the workers—" "I know about the workers," Peter cut him off. "I know they are dying. I know the mud is claiming them. I have ordered more conscripts from the south. You will have new men by Christmas." "Sire," Trezzini said, his voice trembling despite his best efforts, "it is not just the men. It is the ground. The ground is unstable. The piles are sinking. I have driven them deeper than any foundation in Europe, but the marsh—" "The marsh is what it is," Peter said. "I have lived with the marsh for 20 years. I have drained it, bridged it, built on it. I will not let it defeat me now." Trezzini looked at the Tsar and saw the same haunted eyes that had looked at him from the cellar of the summer palace 10 years ago. The same fire, the same fear. "Sire," he said, lowering his voice, "the prophet who walked into the river, he told me something. He said that the cathedral must be a key as well as a lock. He said that the cross on the spire must be—" Peter raised a hand. "I know what he said," he said quietly. "I have seen the same visions. I have heard the same voices. I have walked the labyrinth in my dreams. Do you think you are the only one who has seen the old ones, Trezzini? I have seen them every night for 15 years. I have seen them in my sleep. I have seen them in the faces of my children. I have seen them in the water that runs beneath this palace. He stood and walked to a cabinet, its doors inlaid with mother of pearl. He opened it with a key that he wore around his neck, and from within he withdrew a small leather coffer bound with iron bands. "Come here," he said. Trezzini approached. Peter opened the coffer and took out a bundle of yellowed papers, tied with a red silk ribbon. He laid them on the table. "These are the papers of a Swedish navigator," Peter said. "He sailed these waters before I was born, before the first fort was built. He kept a journal of the places he saw, the islands, the sandbars, the depths. And in that journal he marked something strange, something that matches the labyrinth I found under the birch tree." He untied the ribbon and spread the papers across the table. Trezzini leaned in. The maps were rough, hand-drawn, with compass roses and marginal notes in a cramped Swedish hand. But in the center of each map, where the Neva met the Gulf of Finland, the navigator had drawn a series of circles, connected by lines that formed a pattern. "Do you see?" Peter said, tracing the pattern with his finger. "The circles, they are not random. They mark the places where the stones stand, the great stones, the menhirs, the ones the Finns call the seta. They form a ring, Trezzini, a ring that encloses the entire delta of the Neva. And at the center of the ring," he pointed to a spot marked with a cross, "the center is here, where we are now, where the cathedral stands." Trezzini stared at the map. The pattern was unmistakable. It was the same labyrinth he had seen on the stone slab, the same branching pattern that had haunted his dreams since his first night on Hare Island. "These stones," he said, his mouth dry, "they are the pillars of the prison." "Exactly," Peter said. "The old ones built them to contain something, and I have built my city on top of them to reinforce the prison. But the prison is only as strong as its center. If the center fails, the stones lose their power, the ring breaks, and the prisoner—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Trezzini looked at the maps, at the labyrinth, at the cross in the middle, and he understood, with a clarity that chilled him, that the cathedral was not the prison. The cathedral was the lid, the heavy stone that covered the well, and the spire was the handle by which the lid could be lifted. "Sire," he said slowly, "if the prisoner is as powerful as you say, what happens when it wakes?" Peter met his gaze. There was no fear in his eyes now, only a grim resignation. "I will be dead," he said. "That is why I need you to finish the spire, to seal the lid so tightly that it will take 1,000 years for the prisoner to find the cracks. And perhaps by then the world will have forgotten what sleeps beneath us." He closed the coffer and handed it to Trezzini. "Take this," he said. "Study it. Learn the pattern. And when you build the spire, build it to the exact measurements of the ring. Not 1 centimeter more, not 1 centimeter less. The old ones are precise. We must be precise too." Trezzini took the coffer, his hands shaking. He had come to Russia to build a city of light and reason. Instead, he had become the guardian of an ancient nightmare. That night, he sat in his study and opened the navigator's journal. The handwriting was small, precise, and the text was in Swedish, a language he had learned from the prisoners on Hare Island. He read the passage that Peter had marked with a cross. "I have sailed these waters for 30 years, and I have never seen a place so strange as this delta. The compass needle spins at the mouth of the river, as if the earth itself is twisted. The Finns say that a god sleeps beneath the deep, and that the stones are his teeth, and that the islands are the bones of his servants. I do not believe such tales, but I have seen the lights at night, and I have heard the singing, and I do not sleep well on these shores." Trezzini closed the journal and pressed his palms to his eyes. The singing, he had heard it too. The singing of the drowned children, calling him deeper into the dark. He wrote in his diary, "I am no longer the man who came to Russia. I have become something else, a keeper of secrets, a builder of cages, a worshipper at the altar of the deep. The Tsar has entrusted me with his nightmare, and I will carry it to my grave. But I will not let the nightmare consume me. I will build the spire, and I will seal the lid, and I will hope that the 1,000 years are enough. God save this city, and God save me." Chapter 9. The Black Drawing. February 1723. Trezzini's study, Petrograd side. The winter had settled over St. Petersburg like a shroud. Not the bright, glittering frost of the northern tales, but a gray, wet cold that seeped through the walls and turned the ink in Trezzini's pot to sludge. He had been working for 3 days without sleep, drafting the final plans for the 12 colleges, the long Baroque building that was to stretch along the embankment of Vasilievsky Island like a spine of stone. The work was meticulous, maddening. Every window had to align with every other window. Every column had to echo the rhythm of the columns beside it. The Tsar had demanded perfection, and Trezzini, despite his exhaustion, had given it. But the lines would not stay straight. He had redrawn the eastern facade 4 times. Each time, when he stepped back to admire the symmetry, he saw that the corners had drifted, by a hair, by a whisper, so that the building seemed to lean, almost imperceptibly, toward the river. He blamed the poor light, the trembling of his hand, the fatigue that had settled into his bones like lead. The stove rumbled behind him. The house spirit, the domovoi, had been quiet for months, but Trezzini had never quite forgotten its presence. Sometimes, when he worked late, he caught a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, a shape, heavy and low, squatting on the floor like a sack of grain. Sometimes he heard a soft chuckle, like water trickling over pebbles. He had learned to ignore it. Tonight, however, the chuckle was louder, and the shadow in the corner was watching. "Be still," Trezzini muttered, not looking up. "I have no time for games." The shadow shifted. A voice, dry, rustling, like dead leaves stirred by a draft, spoke from the corner. "You draw hard lines. Hard lines make the earth ache. The earth aches, and the old ones feel it. They wake a little more each day." Trezzini's pen stopped. He had never heard the domovoi speak before, only the rumbles and the chuckles, the falling of drawings, the green glow in the stove. But this voice was clear, distinct, and it carried the weight of something older than the house itself. He turned slowly. The shadow had coalesced into a shape, a small, wizened man, no taller than a child, with skin like bark and eyes like two embers. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his long beard trailing over his knees, and he was smiling, a smile that showed no teeth, only a dark, infinite well. "You," Trezzini said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "You have been in my house for 6 years. You have disturbed my work, frightened my son, and now you speak to me. Why?" "Because you are close," the domovoi said. "Close to the truth. Close to the drawing that will change everything." Trezzini stared at him. "What drawing?" The domovoi pointed a gnarled finger at the plans for the 12 colleges. "That one, the long building on the island. You think it is a palace for the Tsar's ministers, but it is something else. It is a line, a long, straight line that points to the heart of the ring, and it is not straight enough." Trezzini looked down at the drawing. The domovoi was right. The line of the building did not align perfectly with the axis of the Peter and Paul Cathedral. It was off by a few degrees, a small error that would be invisible to the naked eye, but significant to the geometry of the seal. "Fix it," the domovoi said. "Fix it now. Then look at the drawing again. Look at the whole drawing." Trezzini hesitated. He was an architect, a rationalist, a man of the Enlightenment. He should not be taking advice from a house spirit. But something in the creature's voice, something ancient and patient, compelled him. He took his compass and adjusted the angle of the building, shifting it a hair to the north. Then he stepped back and looked at the plan as a whole. The 12 colleges, the Admiralty, the Summer Palace, the Peter and Paul Cathedral, the fortress, the canals, the embankments. And then he saw it. The lines of the buildings, when taken together, formed a shape, a great sprawling star with 5 points. The 12 colleges formed one arm. The Admiralty formed another. The Summer Palace, the Kunstkamera, the naval warehouses formed the others. And at the center of the star, where all the lines converged, stood the cathedral. It was a pentagram, a reversed pentagram, its points pointing to the 4 corners of the compass, and the 5th pointing to the river, to the gulf, to the place where the water was deepest. Trezzini felt the blood drain from his face. He had studied Hermetic geometry. He knew the significance of the pentagram. It was a symbol of binding, of trapping, of sealing. But a reversed pentagram, that was a different matter. That was a symbol of release. "What have I built?" he whispered. The domovoi chuckled, a sound like stones grinding together. "You have built a cage, Italian. But the cage has a door. The Tsar did not tell you that. He did not tell you that the seal was also a key. He built the city to keep the old ones in, but he also built it to let them out when the time is right. He is not a jailer. He is a gatekeeper. And you have been his apprentice all along." Trezzini slumped into his chair. The room seemed to spin around him, the drawings, the stove, the shadowy figure, all blurring into a vortex of horror and revelation. "Peter knows?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He knows that the pentagram is reversed? He knows that the city is not a prison, but a summoning?" "Peter knows everything," the domovoi said. "He is not a fool. He is a man who has made a bargain with the deep. He has traded the soul of his city for power. Power to build, to conquer, to remake the world in his image. And when he dies, the bargain will come due. The old ones will rise, and the city will sink, and the cycle will begin again." Trezzini looked at the drawing. The pentagram stared back at him, its 5 points like 5 fingers reaching for the sky. He had spent 15 years building this city, pouring his heart and his soul into every stone, every beam, every line of ink. And all of it had been a trap. He stood up, his legs shaky. "I will not finish it," he said. "I will not build the spire. I will not seal the lid. I will let the city sink if I must, but I will not be a party to this madness." The domovoi laughed, a long, rattling laugh that shook the room. "You think you have a choice?" it said. "You are bound, Italian. Bound by your oaths, bound by your work, bound by the Tsar's gold. If you stop now, the city will collapse within a year. The foundations will crack, the walls will crumble, and the prisoners, the ones who live in the mud, they will feast. Is that what you want? To drown thousands of souls because you could not bear to be a tool?" Trezzini opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. The domovoi was right. He had gone too far to turn back. Every pile he had driven, every beam he had raised, every stone he had laid, it was all part of the pattern. He could not undo it. He could only complete it, or watch the city die. Slowly he sat back down. He picked up his pen and dipped it in the ink. "Tell me," he said, his voice hollow. "What must I do? How do I finish the pattern in a way that limits the damage? If I cannot stop the bargain, can I at least delay it?" The domovoi leaned forward, its ember eyes glowing brighter. "You can make the lock stronger," it said. "You can add your own seal, a seal that Peter does not know about. A seal that will hold even after he is gone. But it will cost you." "What cost?" "Your name," the domovoi said. "Your legacy. The work of your hands will be forgotten. Your drawings will be lost. Your son will never know what you built or why. You will die in obscurity, and the city will remember you only as a footnote, a minor architect, a servant of the Tsar's whim." Trezzini was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I have already given my life to this city," he said. "What is my name on top of that? Show me the seal. Show me how to bind the prisoner so tightly that it cannot break free for 1,000 years." The domovoi smiled, a smile that was almost kind, and pointed to the drawing of the cathedral. "At the base of the spire," it said, "you will carve a chamber. In the chamber you will place a stone, the same stone that was under the birch tree, the one the Tsar showed you in the cellar. On that stone you will carve your own mark, a compass and a square, the symbol of your craft. And you will write the name of the city backwards, in a spiral, so that the dead cannot read it. That is the seal. That is the lock that only you can close. Trezzini picked up his pen and began to draw. Not the cathedral as it was meant to be, but a hidden chamber, a secret space, a place where the old stone could rest in darkness. He drew it with the precision of a man who knows he is writing his own epitaph. The domovoi watched him work, and its chuckle faded into the crackle of the stove. Outside, the Neva groaned under the weight of the ice, and the wind carried a song of children, deep and clear, rising from the frozen river. Chapter 10. The Letter, 1724. April. The greenhouse, Petrograd side. Trezzini's wife, Anna, had been dead for 4 years, but her memory lingered in every corner of the house, in the chipped cup she had used for her tea, in the threadbare shawl that still hung by the door, in the silence that filled the rooms where her cough had once echoed. Pietro had grown into a young man of 20, his father's height and his mother's dark, serious eyes. He worked as a draftsman in the Tsar's chancery, copying plans and drawing maps, but his heart was not in it. He had seen too many men die in the mud. He had heard too many stories of the old ones, and he had seen the shadow in the corner of his father's study, the shadow that sometimes spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. "I am going to leave, Papa," Pietro said one evening as they sat by the stove. "I am going to Switzerland. I have relatives there, my mother's cousins. They have offered me a position in their trading house. I will be safe there. I will be free." Trezzini looked at his son and felt a weight settle over his heart. He had known this day would come. Pietro was not built for the marsh, for the darkness, for the secrets that pressed in from every side. "Go," Trezzini said, his voice flat. "It is better for you. You should not be here when the ice breaks." Pietro frowned. "The ice breaks every spring, Papa. The river floods the lower streets. It is a nuisance, not a disaster." Trezzini shook his head. "You do not understand. The ice is not just ice. It is a membrane, a skin that covers the deep. When it breaks, the old ones stir. They feel the warmth of the sun, and they press against the seal. That is why the Tsar is so desperate to finish the cathedral. He knows that if the spire is not raised by the Annunciation of next year, the membrane will tear." Pietro stared at his father, his face pale. "You speak like the peasants," he said. "You speak of spirits and seals and things I cannot see. You are not the man who raised me. You are—" "I am what the city has made me," Trezzini interrupted. "And you will be what the city makes you, if you stay. That is why you must go, Pietro. Go to Switzerland. Marry a woman who knows nothing of marshes. Build houses that sit on solid ground. And remember me, if you can, as a man who did what he had to do." Pietro was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and went to his room, closing the door softly. Trezzini took out a sheet of paper and dipped his pen in the ink. He had written many letters in his life, to clients, to colleagues, to the Tsar himself. But this letter was different. This letter was a confession. To my brother-in-law, Marco Veronese, in Lugano. I am writing to you because I do not know who else to tell. I have built a city on a swamp. I have built it according to a plan that I did not fully understand until it was too late. The Tsar has deceived me, or perhaps I have deceived myself. I thought I was building a capital of reason, a window to Europe. In truth, I have been building a cage for something that should never have been disturbed. I cannot tell you what that something is. I do not know its name. The Finns call it the Lamo. The Old Believers call it the Serpent. The Tsar calls it simply the Prisoner. But I have seen its traces in the stone circles, in the labyrinth beneath the summer palace, in the singing that rises from the Neva at night. It is old, Marco, older than Russia, older than the Romans, and it is hungry. I have tried to seal it, to make the cathedral a lock that will hold for 1,000 years. But I fear I have only made the lock stronger for the prisoner's benefit. The Tsar has planned all along to open the door when he dies. He thinks he can command the old ones, use them to extend his power beyond the grave. He is wrong. They will use him, and then they will use us all. I'm sending Pietro to you. Please take him in. He is innocent of all of this. He is a good boy, a true architect in the making. Give him the life I could not give him. As for me, I will finish the cathedral. I will seal the chamber. I will carve the last stone with my own name, backward, so that the dead cannot read it. And then I will wait. I will wait for the ice to break, for the prisoner to stir, for the city to stand or to fall. If you never hear from me again, know that I died as I lived, building. And if there is a God, I pray he will forgive me for what I have built. Your brother-in-law, Domenico Trezzini. He sealed the letter with his brass ring, the compass, and the square, and handed it to Pietro the next morning. "Deliver this to the courier at the Chancery," he said. "It goes to Switzerland." Pietro looked at the letter, then at his father's face. "What is in it, Papa? What have you written?" "Truth," Trezzini said. "The truth that I have been hiding for 15 years. Go now, and do not read it. It is not for your eyes." Pietro nodded and left. Trezzini watched him go, and he knew he would never see his son again. A week later, a man in a gray coat arrived at the greenhouse. He did not knock. He walked straight in, his boots heavy on the floorboards. He was from the secret chancellery, the Tsar's personal police, the men who investigated plots and conspiracies, who made men disappear in the middle of the night. "You are Signor Trezzini?" the man asked. His face was expressionless, his voice flat as ice. "I am." "You sent a letter to Switzerland. The courier was intercepted. You are accused of writing seditious material, of questioning the Tsar's authority, of spreading fear among the populace. The Tsar himself has ordered your interrogation." Trezzini felt his stomach drop. He had known the letter was a risk, but he had not expected this. Peter had always been tolerant of his eccentricities, his doubts, his questions. But to write openly of the prisoner, of the seal, of the bargain, that was treason of a different order. "You may take me," Trezzini said, rising. But I warn you, the Tsar will regret this. I am the only man who can finish the cathedral. Without me, the seal will fail, and then the Tsar will deal with the consequences, the man said. He is not afraid of spirits or seals. He is only afraid of men who speak too freely. Come. Trezzini was taken to the fortress, to a cell in the Peter and Paul prison, the same prison whose foundations he had laid with his own hands. He sat in the damp and the dark, waiting for the Tsar's judgment. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He only listened to the sound of the water lapping against the walls, and he thought of Anna and Pietro and the old ones stirring in the deep. After 3 days, the door opened. A guard stood in the threshold, his face impassive. "The Tsar has pardoned you," he said. "He says you are to return to your work, but you are to keep your letters to yourself, and you are to finish the spire by the Annunciation, or you will be returned here, and this time the water will take you." Trezzini was released. He walked back to the greenhouse, his body aching, his mind churning. He opened the door, and he saw the domovoi sitting in the corner, its ember eyes glowing in the dusk. "You see," the creature said, "he does not let go. He needs you too much. But he also fears you. He fears what you might tell the world. That is why you must finish the seal, to show him that you are not a threat, but a servant, a loyal, obedient servant." Trezzini nodded. He had no more strength to argue. He went to his study, picked up his pen, and began to draw the hidden chamber beneath the cathedral, the chamber where the old stone would lie and where his name would be carved backward, a silent prayer to the prisoner below. Outside, the Neva was beginning to break. The ice groaned and cracked, and from the depths a song rose, a song of children, and of something older than children, something that had been waiting for a very long time. Part 3. The Seal. Chapter 11. The Tsar's Last Will. January 17, 25. The Winter Palace, St. Petersburg. The frost that winter was the cruelest Trezzini had ever known. It cracked the stones of the embankment, split the timbers of the bridges, and turned the Neva into a vast white desert that stretched to the horizon. The city had become a ghost of itself, streets empty, windows dark, the smoke from 1,000 chimneys rising straight up into a sky the color of lead. Trezzini had not slept in 3 days. He had been working on the final drawings for the cathedral spire, the last section, the tip that would pierce the clouds and complete the seal. But the work was slow, agonizing. His hands trembled, his eyes burned, and every time he closed them, he saw the face of the prophet beneath the water, mouthing words he could not hear. On the morning of the 28th of January, a messenger arrived at the greenhouse. He was a young man, pale and breathless, his coat covered with frost. "Signor Trezzini," he said, "the Tsar commands your presence. He is dying." Trezzini felt the words hit him like a blow. He had known this moment was coming. The domovoi had warned him. The prophet had warned him. Even the maps had seemed to whisper of it. But knowing and facing were different things. He took his coat and followed the messenger through the frozen streets to the Winter Palace. Inside, the corridors were crowded with courtiers, their faces masks of grief and calculation. Menshikov paced in the anteroom, his voice a low rumble of orders. The Tsarina, Catherine, sat on a chair by the door, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands clasped in her lap. She did not look at Trezzini as he passed. The Tsar's chamber was stifling, the air thick with the smell of sweat and incense. Peter lay on his bed, his massive frame reduced to a skeleton, his skin gray as the winter sky. His eyes were closed, but his lips moved, forming words that had no sound. Trezzini knelt by the bed. "Sire," he whispered, "I am here." Peter's eyes opened, pale blue, still fierce, still burning with the fire that had built an empire on a swamp. He reached up with a trembling hand and gripped Trezzini's arm. "Trezzini," he breathed, "the spire, is it finished?" Trezzini shook his head. "Not yet, sire. The timber is still being raised. The workers are slow. The frost will kill us all," Peter rasped. "Listen to me, Italian. Listen closely. You must finish the spire before the Annunciation. Not for me, for the city, for the old ones." He paused, his breath a ragged rattle. Trezzini leaned closer, straining to hear. "They are awake," Peter whispered. "I have seen them in my dreams. They press against the seal. They have been pressing for years, but now they are strong. The ice is thin, Trezzini. The ice is thin, and they are pushing." Trezzini felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "What must I do, sire? Tell me." Peter's grip tightened. "Finish the spire, close the circle, and then, when you have sealed it, you must find the old stone, the one under the birch tree, and you must add your mark, your own mark, not mine, your name. The Tsar's name is not enough. I made a bargain, Trezzini. I traded my soul for power, and now the power is slipping. Only you can hold it. Only you can seal it permanently." Trezzini stared at the dying man. All his suspicions, all his fears, all the fragments of the puzzle. They were falling into place. The bargain, the reversed pentagram, the city built as both cage and gate. "Sire," he said, his voice barely audible, "why did you not tell me all of this? 15 years, and you kept the truth from me." Peter smiled, a thin, bitter smile that twisted his gaunt face. "Because if I had told you, you would have run. And I needed you, Trezzini. I needed a man who could see the lines that others cannot see. A man who could build not just walls, but geometry. Sacred geometry. You were the only one in all of Europe who could understand." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his whole body. When he spoke again, his voice was fainter, barely a whisper. "Promise me, Trezzini. Promise me you will close the circle. Promise me you will not let them out." Trezzini looked into the Tsar's eyes. He saw fear, regret, and something else. A flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a storm. "I promise, sire," he said. "I will close the circle. I will seal the stone. And I will carve my name backward so the dead cannot read it." Peter's eyes closed. His grip loosened. And then, with a long, shuddering sigh, the Tsar of all the Russias died. Trezzini knelt beside the bed, his hand still on the Tsar's arm, and he felt the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. He had been Peter's architect, his servant, his confidant. Now he was his heir, not to the throne, but to the nightmare. He rose and walked out of the chamber. The courtiers parted before him, their eyes curious, suspicious. Menshikov stepped forward, his face a mask of calculation. "Well, Italian," he said, "what did he tell you? What instructions did he leave?" Trezzini met his gaze. "He told me to finish the cathedral," he said. "To complete the spire. That is all." Menshikov's eyes narrowed. "Is it? I thought there might be other matters of state." "Only the cathedral," Trezzini said. "The Tsar was a builder, not a politician. He wanted his city to be beautiful. That is all." Menshikov did not believe him. Trezzini could see it in the tightness of his jaw, the coldness of his eyes. But he could not prove anything. The Tsar's last words were known to only one man, and that man was walking out of the palace into the frozen streets with a secret that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The weeks that followed were chaos. Peter died without naming a successor, and the court fractured into factions. Menshikov, with his ruthless ambition, managed to place Catherine on the throne. But she was a figurehead, a puppet, her power constrained by the nobles who surrounded her. The construction of the city ground to a halt. Funds were diverted, workers were reassigned, and the cathedral spire stood half-finished, a skeleton of timber against the gray sky. Trezzini went to the chancery, begged for money, and was refused. He went to Menshikov's palace, demanded an audience, and was turned away at the gate. He wrote letters to the new empress, but they were intercepted and destroyed. He was no longer the Tsar's architect. He was a relic of the previous regime, a foreigner who had outlived his usefulness. And the city he had built with his own hands, began to sink. It started with small things: a crack in the wall of the Admiralty, a leaning pillar in the 12 colleges, a section of the embankment that collapsed into the river, taking 3 houses with it. The ground, which had been so carefully packed and piled, was shifting, settling, moving. Trezzini walked the streets at night, his coat pulled tight against the wind, and he saw the signs that only he could see. The frost patterns on the windows, spiraling into shapes that were not random. The frozen surface of the Neva, cracked in patterns that matched the labyrinth under the summer palace. The sound of singing, faint but unmistakable, rising from the depths. He went to the cathedral site and stood before the incomplete spire. It rose 40 meters into the air, a magnificent structure of oak and pine, braced with iron bands, waiting for the final section that would bring it to its full height. But the timber was rotting, the ropes were fraying, and the workers had abandoned it. He climbed the scaffolding himself, his boots slipping on the frozen beams, his breath misting in the cold. At the top, he looked down at the city, at the grid of streets, the frozen canals, the dark squares of the palaces. And he saw, with a clarity that cut through him like a blade, that the pentagram was incomplete. The missing point was the spire. Without it, the seal was only 5/6 strong, and the prisoner was already testing the gap. He knelt on the scaffold and prayed, not to any god, but to the memory of Peter, to the spirit of the city, to whatever ancient force might be listening. "Give me time," he whispered. "Give me time to finish. I have made a promise, and I will keep it. But I cannot do it alone." There was no answer, only the wind howling through the bones of the cathedral and the distant singing of the river. Chapter 12. The Ghosts of the Construction. April 1725. The Neva embankment near the Peter and Paul fortress. The thaw came late that year, and when it came with a vengeance. The ice broke with a deafening roar, and the river rose, flooding the lower streets, washing away the foundations of the new houses, drowning the livestock and the sleeping poor. The city was in chaos, and Trezzini, with his incomplete cathedral, was the target of every accusation. "It is your fault, Italian," a merchant shouted at him in the street, his face purple with rage. "You built the city too close to the water. You did not raise the embankments high enough. Now my warehouse is flooded, and my goods are ruined." Trezzini did not argue. He walked past the merchant, his eyes fixed on the river. The water was the color of dark tea, thick with sediment and debris, and it churned in places where it should have flowed smoothly. In the center of the stream, just beyond the fortress walls, a whirlpool had formed, a slow circular current that spun debris in a lazy spiral, as if something beneath the surface was stirring the water with a vast, invisible hand. That night, Trezzini went to the cathedral again. The scaffolding was still standing, but the timbers were slick with moisture, and the iron bands were rusting. He climbed to the top and looked down at the river. The whirlpool was still there, but it was larger now, its circumference wider, its rotation faster. In the moonlight, he could see shapes in the water, pale, slender forms, rising and falling like the arms of dancers. They were singing again, their voices high and sweet, a melody that seemed to promise peace, rest, an end to all struggle. Trezzini covered his ears, but the singing was inside his head, not outside. It filled his mind with images. Anna, smiling at him in the garden of their house in Copenhagen. Pietro, laughing as he drew his first line. The Tsar, standing in the cellar of the summer palace, his face alight with a vision of the future. And then, beneath the images, a deeper voice spoke. A voice that was not human, not animal, not anything that had ever drawn breath. "Build," it said. "Build the spire. Raise it high. Raise it sharp. I am patient. I have waited 1,000 years. I can wait a little longer, but I will not wait forever." Trezzini staggered back, his foot slipping on a wet beam. He caught himself on the scaffolding, his heart hammering, his breath ragged. The voice was gone, but its echo lingered in his bones. He climbed down, slowly, carefully, and made his way back to the greenhouse. The domovoi was waiting for him in the study. its ember eyes glowing in the darkness. "You spoke to it," the creature said. "To the prisoner. What did it say?" Trezzini slumped into his chair. "It said it would wait. It said it was patient. It said it has been waiting 1,000 years." The domovoi nodded slowly. "It is old, Italian, older than you can imagine. It has no concept of time, not in the way you understand it. A year is a heartbeat to it. A century is a breath. It can wait. But it is also hungry. And when it is hungry enough, patience fails." "What do I do?" Trezzini asked. "The Tsar is dead. The funds are gone. The workers have fled. I cannot build the spire alone." The domovoi was silent for a moment. Then it spoke, its voice low and careful. "There is a way," it said, "but it is dangerous. The old ones must be fed. That is the law." The Tsar knew this. He fed them with the blood of the workers, with the bones of the prisoners. But now the Tsar is dead, and the feeding has stopped. They will grow restless. They will begin to take what they want. Trezzini stared at the creature. "You are telling me to sacrifice more men." "I am telling you the truth," the domovoi said. "You must make a choice. Let the old ones feed on the city, or find a way to feed them yourself. There is no third path." Trezzini thought of the prophet sinking into the river. He thought of the workers buried in the mud, their hands reaching up through the wet earth. He thought of the singing children, the pale forms in the water, the whirlpool that grew larger every day. He rose from his chair. "Show me," he said. "Show me how to feed them without killing the city." The domovoi led him to the cellar of the greenhouse, to a place he had never noticed before. A small, square chamber, its walls lined with brick that had been painted with symbols. In the center of the floor was an iron grating, and beneath the grating, a darkness that seemed to breathe. "Pour wine into this grating," the domovoi said. "Wine and honey and a drop of your own blood. It is not enough to satisfy them, but it will be enough to keep them quiet for a season, long enough for you to finish the spire." Trezzini knelt and lifted the grating. The darkness below was absolute, a void that seemed to swallow the light of his candle. He poured the wine, the honey, and with a trembling hand he pricked his finger and let a single drop of blood fall into the dark. The darkness moved. It rippled like the surface of a pond struck by a stone, and a sound rose from the depths, a sound like a sigh, like the wind through a forest, like the voice of a sleeping giant turning in its sleep. Trezzini replaced the grating and stood. His legs were weak, his hands trembling, but he knew he had done the right thing. "Now," the domovoi said, "you must work. You have until the spring of 1726 to finish the spire. After that, the old ones will be hungry again, and the wine and honey will not be enough." Chapter 13. The Rite, 1730. March, the Peter and Paul Cathedral, Crypt. 5 years had passed, 5 years of slow, grinding labor, of begging and borrowing, of working with a skeleton crew of loyal men who believed in him, or who were too frightened to leave. The spire had grown, meter by meter, until it reached 2/3 of its intended height. But it was not enough. The seal was still incomplete, and the old ones were growing restless again. Trezzini had grown old too. His hair was white, his back was bent, and his hands shook constantly, not with fear, but with a palsy that had crept into his muscles over the long years of toil. He could no longer climb the scaffolding, could no longer wield a pen with the precision of his youth. But his mind was still sharp, and his will was still iron. In March of 1730, he made a decision. He would complete the seal, not with the spire, which might never be finished, but with a different act. He would go to the crypt beneath the cathedral, to the chamber where the old stone lay, and he would carve his name upon it. The act would not be perfect, but it would be enough to buy the city another decade, perhaps 2. And in that time, perhaps someone else would come, someone who could finish what he had started. He went to find Grusha. The old Vedma was still alive, though she was ancient now, her skin like parchment, her eyes milky with cataracts. She lived in a hut on the edge of the city, surrounded by drying herbs and animal bones, and she had not spoken to Trezzini in over a decade. But when he came to her door, she opened it without asking who he was. "I knew you would come," she said. "The stones told me. The water told me. The old ones told me. They are angry, Italian. They have been angry for a long time. But they will listen to you. They respect the one who built the cage." Trezzini knelt before her. "I need you to come with me," he said, "to the crypt beneath the cathedral. I need you to perform the rite that will bind my name to the stone." Grusha shook her head. "That rite is forbidden. It is not of the old faith. It is of something older, something darker. If I perform it, I will be cursed. I will die within the year." "You will die anyway," Trezzini said. "We all die. But I will not die until I have sealed the stone, and I need you to help me." Grusha was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, reluctantly. "Tonight," she said, "when the moon is high, bring a candle of black wax, a knife of silver, and a lock of your own hair. We will go to the crypt, and we will perform the rite. But if I die, Italian, if the old ones take me, you will bury me with my face to the east, so that my soul can find its way home." Trezzini agreed. That night they descended into the crypt. The stairs were narrow, slippery with moisture, and the air was cold and heavy, as if the stone itself was pressing down on them. At the bottom, a single torch flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The old stone was there, just as Peter had described it, a great flat slab of dark granite, carved with runes that spiraled inward to a center that was empty. The runes were old, older than anything Trezzini had ever seen, and they seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight. Grusha circled the stone, chanting in a language that Trezzini did not recognize. She sprinkled something from a pouch, salt, he thought, or ash, and she traced a circle around the stone with her finger, drawing a line in the dust. "Now," she said, her voice a low whisper, "cut the lock of hair, place it on the stone, and then carve your name, backwards, in a spiral, just as the old ones taught you. Trezzini took the silver knife and cut a lock of his white hair. He laid it on the center of the stone, and then, with a chisel and a hammer, he began to carve. INIZZERTYYNOCIMOD. He carved slowly, carefully, his hand trembling with the effort. As he worked, he felt the stone grow warm beneath his fingers. He heard the singing again, the singing of the children, the voices of the drowned rising from the deep. But this time the singing was not sweet. It was angry, vengeful, a chorus of rage that shook the walls of the crypt. Grusha fell to her knees, her hands pressed to her ears. "They are waking!" she screamed. "Hurry, Italian, hurry!" Trezzini carved faster, his chisel skittering across the stone. He reached the final letter and struck the chisel one last time. The stone roared. A blast of cold air shot up from beneath it, throwing Trezzini against the wall. The torch flickered and went out. The crypt was plunged into darkness. And then, silence. Trezzini lay on the floor, his ears ringing, his body aching. He could not see, but he could feel the weight of the stone, the coolness of the floor, the absence of the singing. It was over. The seal was complete. He reached out in the darkness and found Grusha's hand. It was cold, still. She was dead, taken by the old ones, just as she had feared. He dragged her body up the stairs, laid her on the ground with her face to the east, and said a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, asking them to carry her soul home. Then he walked back to the green house, his body broken, his spirit exhausted. The domovoi was waiting for him, its ember eyes glowing in the dark. "Done?" it asked. "Done," Trezzini said. "The seal is complete. The stone is carved. The old ones are bound." "For now," the domovoi said, "but not forever. Nothing is forever, Italian. Not even stone." Trezzini nodded and collapsed into his chair. He had done what he could. The rest was in the hands of fate, or of something older than fate. Chapter 14. The Last Drawing. 1734. September. The greenhouse, Petrograd side. Trezzini knew he was dying. He had known it for months, ever since the palsy had spread to his legs and he could no longer walk without a stick. The doctors offered him nothing, only leeches, prayers, and the hope that the end would be swift. He did not fear death. He had seen too much, done too much, to fear the final darkness. But he feared forgetting. He feared that the secret he had buried in the crypt would be lost, that the city would forget what lay beneath its streets, that the old ones would eventually wake and find no one to hold them back. So he sat at his table, his trembling hands steadying the pen, and he began to draw. It was not a plan for a building. It was a plan for everything. A map of the city, but overlaid with the secret geometry, the lines that only he could see. He drew the pentagram, the reversed points, the labyrinth beneath the summer palace, the ring of menhirs that encircled the delta. He drew the cathedral, the spire, the hidden chamber where his name was carved in reverse. and he wrote, in Italian, in a small, careful hand, Se questo edificio viene completato, il sigillo si spezzerà. If this building is completed, the seal will break. He did not explain what he meant. He could not. The words would not come. But he knew that someone, some day, would find this drawing and understand. Or, if they did not understand, they would at least wonder. And in wondering, they might remember. He rolled the drawing into a tight cylinder and tied it with a leather cord. Then he summoned his son, not Pietro, who was in Switzerland, but his other son, the one he had not seen in years, the one who had stayed in Russia and become a clerk in the chancery. Take this, he said, handing the cylinder to the young man. Take it to the summer palace. There is a niche in the eastern wall, behind the plaster. It was sealed by the Tsar himself. Open it, place this inside, and seal it again. Tell no one. Show no one. When I am dead, you will have forgotten it. That is the best way. The young man, his name was Pavel, looked at his father with a mixture of confusion and fear. Papa, what is it? What does it mean? It means nothing, Trezzini said, and everything. Now go, and do not open it. If you open it, you will see things that should not be seen. Pavel took the cylinder and left. Trezzini sat in his chair, watching the sun set over the Neva. The sky was red, the color of blood, and the river was dark, the color of ink. He thought of Anna, of Pietro, of the Tsar who had summoned him to this wild place. He thought of the cathedral, still unfinished, its spire reaching for the sky like a broken finger. He had done what he could. He had built the city, sealed the prisoner, and hidden the truth. The rest was up to the world. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 22 years, he slept without dreaming. He died the next morning, sitting in his chair by the stove. The domovoi watched him go, its ember eyes dimming with the passing of the last man who had seen the lines. And in the summer palace, in a niche behind the plaster, the last drawing of Domenico Trezzini lay waiting. For a century, for 2 centuries, for the moment when a restorer's hands would find it and the truth would be revealed. Epilogue. The Restorer, 2026. Summer. The Summer Palace of Peter the Great, St. Petersburg. The restoration team had been working on the eastern wall for 3 weeks, carefully removing the layers of Soviet-era plaster that had covered the original 18th century brickwork. It was delicate work, painstaking work, the kind that required patience and a steady hand. The young restorer, a woman named Katya, was the best on the team. She had a PhD in architectural history, a passion for Petrine-era construction, and a steady hand that had earned her the respect of her colleagues. She worked slowly, chipping away at the plaster with a small trowel, revealing the old bricks beneath. And then she found something strange. Behind the plaster, in a niche that had been sealed with mortar, there was a leather tube, dark with age, cracked at the edges, but intact. She pulled it out with trembling hands and held it up to the light. "What is it?" her colleague asked, peering over her shoulder. "I don't know," Katya said, "but it's old, very old." She opened the tube and unrolled the parchment inside. The drawing was exquisite, a bird's-eye view of St. Petersburg.
The city as it had been in the 1730s, with its palaces and canals and fortresses, all laid out in meticulous detail. But there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface. As Katya held the parchment, her hands warming the paper, faint lines began to appear, a second layer, drawn in a chemical that had remained invisible for centuries. She looked closer. The lines formed a pattern, a star, a pentagram with the cathedral at its center. And around the edges, in a flowing Italian hand, a warning. Se questo edificio viene completato, il sigillo si spezzerà. Katya's heart began to pound. She had studied the history of St. Petersburg. She knew the legends, the stories, the whispers of something ancient beneath the city. But she had never believed them. Until now. She turned to her colleague, her face pale. I think, she said. I think we need to show this to the director. And then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, she heard it. A sound from the river, a sound like singing, high and sweet and ancient. It seemed to come from the very walls of the palace, from the foundations of the city, from the deep beneath the Neva. She looked out the window. The water was still, the sky was clear, but something in the air had changed. Something had shifted. And in the distance, the spire of the Peter and Paul Cathedral, the spire that had never quite been finished, seemed to tremble, just for a moment, as if it had felt the touch of a hand. Katya clutched the drawing to her chest and stepped back from the window. She did not know what she had found. She did not know what she had done. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that the city was no longer asleep. The end. The Last Drawing of Domenico Trezzini, a novel in 3 parts. Copyright Anna Gogoleva, 2026. All rights reserved. No part of this work may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author.